The bottom of the paper bag was letting go, and I could feel the cold of a bagged head of romaine bleeding through to the inside of my forearm, which is the exact second Vanessa Ward decided to say the thing loud enough for the whole lot to hear it. She said it the way people say a thing they've practiced in a mirror. "Meredith, honey, does the boy come with the groceries, or did you have to pay extra?" I didn't look at Vanessa. I looked at Meredith's right hand, the one resting on the lip of the open trunk, and I watched her thumbnail press a little white crescent into the side of her first finger and then let go. She'd done it twice already that evening, once when the register jammed and once when Elodie asked if we could get the cereal with the cartoon horse on it. I'd started cataloging it without meaning to. It was the tell that said she was fine, thank you, and would rather be almost anywhere else. "Evening, Mrs. Ward," I said, and set my failing bag down on the tailgate before it could embarrass all of us. Between us, at hip height, 7-year-old Elodie held a plastic clamshell of blueberries against her chest like it was a small animal she'd been made responsible for, and she looked up at her mother and then at me, waiting to see what the weather was going to do. Here's a thing nobody tells you about drawing cities for a living. You spend your whole day deciding where other people's mornings will happen, where the light hits the bench, where the mother sets down the stroller, and you go home to a rented room with a mattress and a lamp and a rolled tube of paper. I was 29 years old, and I had spent 4 months redesigning the Riverside district of a town I'd lived in for exactly one. And the only thing in Wexler's Crossing that had made me feel like the place might be real instead of a rendering was standing in front of me, pressing her thumbnail into her finger, refusing to give Vanessa Ward the wince she'd come for. That should have told me everything. It took me the rest of the summer to hear it. I want to be honest about the shape of this, because I've noticed I lie by leaving things out, and I'm trying to quit. I didn't walk into Wexler's Crossing looking for Meredith Lee. I walked in with a laptop, a survey of the floodline, and a mandate from the county to modernize the Riverside Commercial Corridor, which is the kind of phrase that means somebody with money wants a nicer view and doesn't want to say so. My job was the plan. The plan ran straight through the middle of Lee's Market, the co-op grocery her grandfather had opened, that her father had kept, that she'd taken over at 31 when her father's heart quit at the register, and she never once, in all the weeks I knew her, described as a burden, though it was. The county paired us, that was the whole beginning of it, and it was nobody's romance, it was a form. The redevelopment needed a merchant's representative to co-chair the district committee alongside the planner for community buy-in, and the merchants elected Meredith because she was the one who'd read the lease code and the one who wasn't afraid of a microphone. So the first real hour I ever spent with her was across a folding table in the community center. Both of us assigned to build the same thing. Neither of us convinced the other wasn't the problem. "You're the one who wants to knock down my building," she said. Not sitting yet, coat still on. "I'm the one who was told to draw a corridor," I said. "The building's not in the drawing yet. That's what the yet is for. That's what you're for." She looked at me a long time. Then she sat and unrolled her own copy of my plan across the table, and I saw she'd read it, really read it, marked it, folded the corner down over the market parcel so many times the paper had gone soft and gray there, the way a page goes when a hand keeps finding it. "Okay, Mr. Reed," she said. "Show me where the yet lives." My old boss, Silas Morgan, who taught me everything I know about rooms and about drawings and about which fights are worth your voice, used to say one line so often I could hear it in my sleep: "The strongest position is the one you never have to raise your voice to defend." He meant zoning hearings. He meant bring the survey, bring the flood data, bring the thing that's just true, and let the loud people wear themselves out against it. I'd built a whole career out of quiet. I did not yet know I was about to need the line for something it was never meant for. The reason my plan was better than Dominic's brochure, the reason it kept the market, came down to a number nobody in town had checked in 30 years. And the morning I found it was the first time Meredith looked at me like I might be worth the trouble I was causing. The county had the whole Riverside parcel flagged flood constrained, which is bureaucrat for you can't build anything real here, which is the exact flag Dominic's people were using to argue the co-op couldn't be rebuilt where it stood. Everyone had taken the flag as gospel because the flag was old, and old things in a small town get treated like weather. But I'd spent enough years watching men in offices copy a number forward without retaking it. So I did the thing planners are supposed to do and almost never bother with. I went to the river with a laser level, a rod, and the original 1994 survey, and I reshot the line myself. I was out there past dawn, up to my shins in cold mud along the bank behind the loading dock, sighting the rod against the actual high water stain on the old retaining wall. When Meredith came out the back of the market in rubber boots with 2 coffees, because Elodie had spotted me from the storeroom window and announced that the map man is in the river. She handed me a cup without a word and held the rod steady at the second station while I shot it. And she was good at it. She didn't wobble. She watched my hand for the signal instead of talking. And when I ran the levels right there on the tailgate of my truck, the answer came out plain on the page. The flood line the county had been quoting was set 11 inches too high because the 94 survey had used the old dam's spillway crest, and the dam had been redecked in 2003 and dropped the crest, and nobody had reshot it since. 11 inches. 11 inches was the whole market. 11 inches was 11 families. "Say that again in English," Meredith said, gripping the warm cup in both hands. "The county says your building's in the flood zone. The county's wrong. It's been wrong since before Elodie was born." I turned the field sheet toward her, the signed levels, the crest elevation, the delta, the arena of it all right there in pencil on a clipboard braced on my knee. "This says your store is legal to rebuild exactly where it stands. Dominic's whole argument that it can't be is a typo somebody made in 1994, and everybody's been too lazy to check." She didn't say anything for a second. Her thumbnail found her finger. Then she looked from the sheet to the wall to me, and she said, "You crawled in the river at 6 in the morning to check a typo." "It's not a typo if it's 11 families," I said, which was the truest thing I'd said out loud in a while, and she heard it as true, and something in her recalibrated. I filed the corrected survey with the county that Friday, and the following week, the county's own staff engineer, a gray, careful man named Marcus Ward, no relation to Vanessa, which the town found endlessly funny, called me into his office, laid my field sheet next to the 1994 original, and said, "You're right. It's been wrong for 30 years and nobody caught it. Where'd you learn to reshoot a crest?" I told him Silas Morgan, and Marcus said, "Figures. Only Morgan's people bother." Then he redrew the flood line on the official map, 11 inches down, and Lee's Market went from unbuildable to protected legacy structure in a single stamped correction, and Dominic Parker lost his best argument before he ever got to use it. That was the first room I made go quiet, though it was only a room of 2, and Meredith wasn't in it, and I told her about it that night the way you tell someone a thing you're pretending isn't a gift. Vanessa Ward chaired the town council, and Vanessa Ward had a nephew, Dominic Parker, a developer out of the city with a firm and a brochure, and the two of them wanted the Riverside plan to skip the co-op idea I'd sketched, a rebuilt public market anchored by Lee's, and go straight to what Dominic's brochure called curated retail, which is city for expensive and empty. The trouble was, my plan was better, and it was cheaper, and it kept the market, so they couldn't beat it on the merits. They needed another way. And by the 3rd meeting, I understood what the way was going to be, because Vanessa kept finding reasons to say the words optics and the two of them in the same breath. The first real work Meredith and I did together, we did on a Tuesday night after the center emptied out, and it was the night I stopped being able to pretend she was a form. The committee had to submit a merchant's impact map by Friday, every stall, every lease term, every family that would have to move if the corridor went one way or the other. And it was a mess. 40 years of handshake agreements and a filing cabinet that smelled like her father's cigarettes. We spread it all on the floor because the table wasn't big enough. She read leases. I built the map. We passed each other pages without talking for an hour, and it wasn't awkward. It was the opposite of awkward. 2 people doing separate quiet work in the same square of light and neither one reaching for a phone. Around 10, she found the lease that had been mislabeled for a decade and had been quietly overcharging the flower vendor. Mrs. Ruiz, $400 a quarter. And she stopped, and she pressed her thumbnail into her finger. And she said, "My dad did this. He wouldn't have meant to. He was..." And she stopped. I let it stop. That's the whole thing I did. I didn't say he was probably tired, or the system was confusing, or any of the true useless things you say to close a silence for your own comfort. I just kept drawing the little rectangle that was Mrs. Ruiz's stall and let Meredith's sentence stay unfinished on the floor between us until she picked it back up herself. 30 seconds later, in a steadier voice, "I'll fix it. I'll credit her back to the start." I nodded and wrote the number in the margin so she wouldn't have to remember it. She noticed that I'd written it. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I drove her and Elodie home that night because her car was in the shop, and I didn't mention that the shop was in the opposite direction from my room, or that I'd looked up which streets flooded when it rained, so I could take the dry ones with a sleeping kid in the back. You do a thing like that quietly, or you don't do it at all. Elodie fell asleep against the window, with the blueberry clamshell still in her lap. Empty now. And Meredith looked back at her and then forward at the wet road and said, "She likes you. She doesn't like most people. She's got a sense for it." "She's got good taste in blueberries," I said, which was a bad joke, and it landed a half-second wrong, and Meredith laughed anyway, surprised out of herself, one real laugh she hadn't planned, and then the scene just went back to being a quiet drive. I have thought about that laugh a stupid number of times since. The arrangement, when we named it, had rules, because she's a woman who survives on rules. We would co-chair. We would be professional. We would not, she said, give Vanessa Ward a single thing to hold. I said that was smart. I believed it was smart. I did not tell her that professional was already, by that Tuesday, a coat I was wearing over something else because there was nothing to tell yet. Only a fact I was keeping still about, that the best hour of my week had become a filing cabinet that smelled like a dead man's cigarettes, as long as she was on the other side of it. The merchants' vote needed a room, and the only room big enough that the merchants trusted was the market's own backlot. So the weekend before the vote, we built it, a proper open-air market square, a dry run of the thing my plan promised, 12 stalls out of scrap lumber and canopy frames, so the vendors could stand in the future instead of being asked to imagine it. That was Meredith's idea, and it was a better idea than any I'd had. Because you don't win a vote by showing people a rendering. You win it by letting them feel Saturday morning in a place that doesn't exist yet. We built it together, the two of us and whoever the merchant sent, and building a thing beside someone tells you more about them than a year of meetings. She was fast and impatient, and she measured once and cut once, and she had opinions about stall width that turned out to be correct. I ran the frames and the canopy tension. She ran the layout and the people. Somewhere around the fourth stall, we stopped narrating what we were doing and just moved around each other. Her handing me the driver before I asked for it, me holding the frame square while she checked it against nothing but her own eye. And it was the same feeling as the filing cabinet floor. Separate work, same square of light, no wasted words. When a canopy pole slipped and swung toward her, I put a hand flat on it and stopped it without thinking and said, "Careful." And she said, "I've got it." And I let go, because she did have it. And that was the whole grammar of us in 3 words. Elodie built too, in her way. She was in charge of the welcome table, which was a card table and a coffee can of markers. And she made a sign that said Lee's Market with the apostrophe defiantly absent. And she built, out of a scrap 2x4 and a tuna can and roughly 400 nails, a bird feeder so crooked it looked like it was ducking. She was ferociously proud of it. She hung it on the corner post of the first stall and informed us both that it was the mascot and could not be moved. Meredith started to say something about how it wouldn't survive a good wind, then looked at her daughter's face and stopped, and the crooked feeder stayed on the corner post, And I want to tell you that little lopsided thing outlasted the whole vote and the whole hearing and is still, 2 winters later, hanging on the same post in the Finnish square, ducking, full of birds, mascot of everything we managed to keep. Meredith's friend Daphne Carter ran the coffee stand at the far end and watched all of this the way a good friend watches, which is to say sideways and out loud. She caught me refilling the vendor's water and rerouting the extension cords away from the puddle by the loading dock without being asked. And she said, low, so Meredith wouldn't hear. You know she's going to try to send you away, right before it matters. She does it every time she likes something too much. Her husband left before Elodie could walk, and she decided the safe move was to do the leaving herself from then on. I said I'd noticed. Daphne looked at me for a second and said, then don't take the exit when she opens it for you. That's the whole test. She won't tell you it's a test. I said thank you. She handed me a coffee I didn't ask for and said, don't thank me. Just pass it. Which is, I would learn. The family's entire language of love. You don't announce the kindness. You just do it and let the other person catch you. I did not, at the time, know how completely Daphne had just handed me the map to the next 2 months of my life. There was one night that had no plot in it, which is maybe why I remember it best. We were doing the vendor ledgers at the counter after close, a storm coming in over the river, and the power browned out and steadied and browned again. And Meredith lit the 2 hurricane lamps she kept under the register for exactly this. Because a store that old floods you with reasons to be ready, we worked by lamplight, rain came sideways against the glass. At some point she stopped writing and looked at the front of the store, at nothing, and said, my father used to run the numbers by these same lamps when the power went. I used to sit right there on that stool and think he was the smartest man alive. She turned the pencil over in her fingers. I keep waiting to feel like I'm allowed to be the one holding the pencil. Like somebody's going to come in and tell me I'm just playing at it and I have to give the store back. And then she pressed her thumbnail into her finger and started to say, it's stupid, and stopped. I let the stop be. I'd learned that much. I didn't tell her it wasn't stupid or that she'd earned the pencil, because she knew both of those things, and hearing them from me would only make them mine. Instead, I reached over and did the one thing that was true and small and not a speech. I moved the second lamp 6 inches closer to her side of the counter, so the light fell on her ledger instead of the dark middle of the store, and I went back to my own column. She watched me do it. The rain kept on. My hand had wanted to cover hers on the counter, and I hadn't, because the wanting wasn't the point, and the counter between us was hers to cross or not, and she knew I knew that. And somehow the 6 inches of lamplight said all of it better than a hand would have. We finished the ledgers. The storm passed, nothing happened, and it was one of the largest things that ever happened to me. The wound in her showed up sideways, the way real wounds do. It came out the night Elodie had a fever and the merchant's vote was the next morning, and Meredith was standing in her kitchen at 11 at night trying to do both, cold cloth in one hand, the vote count on a legal pad in the other, and she looked at me in her own doorway, because I'd come by to drop off the corrected map. And she said, too fast, like she was getting ahead of me, you should go. You really should. This isn't, I'm nearly 10 years older than you. Wesley. I have a sick kid in a dying store and a nephew of the council chair telling everyone in town you're my toy. There's nothing here that isn't a liability for you. I'm being kind, telling you to go. Her words came too fast, but the cold cloth never left Elodie's forehead. I didn't argue. I set the corrected map on the counter and asked whether she wanted me to take the vote count. I asked if I could take the vote count off her hands so she could hold her kid with both. And she stared at me and handed me the legal pad. And I sat at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning, building the merchant's turnout plan while she rocked Elodie in the next room. And neither of us said a romantic word, and it was the closest I'd felt to another human being in years. We won the vote, 22-9, the merchants backing the co-op plan over Dominic's brochure. I remember Mrs. Ruiz crying and Meredith not crying, holding it, blinking once, hard, and reaching for her water glass instead. That night I called Silas, because you call the person who taught you when a thing goes right. Or you should. He was retired down in Florida, on a porch, dying slowly of the ordinary thing men his age die of, and refusing to make the dramatic. I told him about the 11 inches and the crest correction and the vote. He was quiet on the line a while, oxygen tank ticking somewhere behind him, and then he said, "You sound different." "Wes, you in trouble?" I said, "No." He said, "You sound like a man who found a place." I said, "Maybe." He said, "The plans were never the point. Kid, I gave you the plans so you'd have a reason to stand somewhere long enough to notice you wanted to stay. Don't draw one more town you don't live in." Then he told me a bad joke about herons and made me promise to send pictures of the finished square. And I did, eventually. But he never saw them, and I've made my peace with that being one of the things that doesn't tie up. The market square wasn't real yet, but the river was, so that's where we took the celebrating. Meredith and Elodie and I walked the bank at dusk where I'd shot the levels, past the loading dock, out to the old retaining wall with the high water stain on it, and Elodie made me point out the exact spot where the map man was in the river, and then made me tell the whole story of the 11 inches again with hand gestures, which I did. And Meredith laughed at the gestures, the second real laugh I'd earned off her, and this one she didn't try to take back. Somewhere out there, Elodie announced she was cold, and I had the jacket half off before she finished the sentence. And Meredith looked at me doing it and started to say, "You don't have to," and stopped, and let me. And I draped the jacket over her daughter's shoulders and said nothing, because that was the whole point of it. You do the thing quietly or you don't do it at all. We stood at the wall and watched the water go gray. 3 people not talking, and it was not awkward, and I understood standing there that I had stopped being a man who was passing through. I remember thinking we were through the worst of it. I have a talent for thinking that at exactly the wrong time. Because that was when Vanessa stopped fighting the plan and started fighting us. The rumor went out the way a rumor goes out in a town that size. Not a poster, just a temperature. A whisper at the counter that the market's situation was complicated now. A line in the church bulletin's community notes about leadership best kept above reproach. Then the thing that actually had teeth, a letter to the county, unsigned but everyone knew the hand, alleging that the co-chair relationship was compromised by a personal entanglement and requesting the district plan be paused pending review of impropriety. It didn't have to be true. It only had to be loud enough, close enough to the hearing, to make the county nervous. And a nervous county kills a plan by simply doing nothing until the deadline passes. Vanessa didn't need to win. She needed the clock. The letter hit the market, too. That's the part I hadn't planned for, and it's the part that nearly ended us, because Meredith's livelihood ran on being trusted with people's grocery money and their gossip. And a town that had decided her judgment was compromised is a town that starts shopping at the chain on the highway just this once. Her Saturday numbers dropped a third in 1 week. I watched her stand at that register and thank people by name who wouldn't quite meet her eye, and press her thumbnail into her finger, and keep the store open anyway. And I have never in my life wanted to burn a building down more. And I have also never been more sure that burning it down was exactly the wrong tool. The worst of it I saw with my own eyes. A woman I won't name, a regular, 20 years a regular, the kind of customer whose order Meredith knew by heart, came to the counter with a half-full basket and set it down, and said she just wasn't comfortable, given everything, and turned to leave the basket there for someone else to reshelve. And Meredith, who could have said 100 things, said only, "That's all right. Carol, your dry cleaning's still under the register whenever you want it. I held it back for you like always." Which gutted the woman, quietly, the way only kindness aimed at cruelty can. And the woman left anyway. And Meredith reshelved the basket herself, one item at a time, and I stood in the aisle pretending to read a label so she wouldn't have to be watched doing it. Mrs. Ruiz came out from the flower stall and stood next to her at the register for the rest of the afternoon without being asked. Just stood there, so that anyone who came in with a face on had to say it to 2 women instead of 1, Nobody had to teach these people loyalty. It was just how they'd been built, the same as the store. That was the night I made my mistake. I decided the way to help was to disappear into the work and hand her a victory instead of a hand. For 4 days, I answered fear the only way I knew. I stopped calling and buried myself in statutes. By the time the folder was finished, Meredith had heard only the silence. I spent 4 days pulling the county's own conflict of interest statute apart, and I found the thing that was just true, that a co-chair relationship is only disqualifying if it's undisclosed and materially benefits one party, and ours was neither. And I could prove it with the timestamps on every filing we'd made and the fact that the plan cost Dominic's people money and cost me nothing. I built the whole defense. I did not tell Meredith I was building it because I wanted to walk in with it finished, like a gift, and that was a mistake, because while I was quietly saving her, she thought I was quietly leaving. She found me in the market after close the Thursday before the hearing, sweeping. She had a broom in her hand and she was sweeping a floor that was already clean. And I recognized it, the thing you do with your hands when the rest of you is somewhere it can't win. She didn't look up. "You've been scarce," she said. "I've been working." Right on the thing, the broom stopped. "Wesley, why are you still here? Truly. You could disclose the whole committee thing, resign the co-chair, walk into that hearing clean, save your plan, and never have my name near yours again. That's the smart play. You keep telling me you love the smart play. So why are you standing in my closed store on a Thursday holding a folder you won't show me?" And there it was, the question under all her other questions, the one she'd been circling since the kitchen. She set the broom against the shelf and faced me, and she said it plain, and her voice didn't shake, which is how I knew it cost her everything. "Why me? Why not someone your own age, someone without the store and the kid and the whole town watching for you to come to your senses? Why not the easy version, Wesley? What do you actually want here?" I could have said something warm. I had warm things ready. But she'd asked me a true question, and she deserved the true answer, not the pretty one. So I put the folder down on the belt where the groceries go, and I said the plainest thing I've ever said out loud. "Because they're not you, simple." The store went quiet in a way that a store doesn't. The cooler hummed suddenly loud, and I let it sit there for a second before I said the rest. "I don't want the easy version. I've had the easy version. It's a rented room and a rolled-up drawing of somebody else's town. You're the first place I've stood in a year that felt like it was actually mine to stand in, and the age and the store and the kid aren't the price of that. Meredith, they're the reasons. I'm not staying because I can survive them. I'm staying because I want them." She pressed her thumbnail into her finger. Then she stopped and let her hand open and looked at it like it belonged to someone else. "You should have shown me the folder," she said, quiet. "Yeah," I said. "I should have. I do that. I go quiet and I fix things and I forget the fixing looks like leaving. I'm sorry," which is a hard sentence for me. And she watched me spend it, and something in her face put the broom down for good. The hearing was on a Wednesday in the community center, the same folding tables where we'd started, and it was as public as this town got. County rep at the front, Vanessa in the second row with Dominic's brochure in her lap like a hymnal, Mrs. Ruiz and half the merchants filling the back, and Meredith and me at the co-chairs table with the soft-cornered plan between us. I want to be clear that I did not win it. We won it. And the order of that mattered, and I only understood how much it mattered because of what I almost did wrong. Vanessa moved first. She stood without being called, and she said the thing to the whole room, dressed up as concern. "I just think this county should ask itself whether a plan can be trusted when the two people running it are, well, we all know. It's not personal. It's about optics. The optics are simply not appropriate, given the ages, given the... Do you want me to take this?" I said, low, to Meredith. "Or do you want to?" Because I could feel the old reflex, step in front, end the rude party with one clean line. I had the line, and I'd have done it a month before without asking. But Silas's other rule, the one under the famous one, was that the strongest position is the one you never have to raise your voice to defend. And I finally understood he'd never been talking about volume. He'd been talking about whose it was. This position was hers. It was her name, her store, her town. If I grabbed the microphone to defend her, I'd prove Vanessa's whole point, that she was a woman who needed a young man to speak for her. The only way to win was to hand her the true thing and get out of her way. Meredith looked at me. "I've got it," she said. She stood. She didn't raise her voice. She said, "Mrs. Ward's letter alleges an undisclosed conflict. Here's every filing this committee has made." And I slid the timestamps across. The deliverable. The thing that was just true. Each one disclosed. Each one dated. Each one costing me nothing and Mr. Reed nothing, and costing Mr. Parker, specifically, the contract he flew in for. The county's own statute, Section 4, requires an undisclosed benefit. There isn't one. What there is. And here she let it land. And the room went quiet the second way. The way that means everyone's finally listening. Is a store my grandfather built. A plan that keeps it and 11 other families in business. And a council chair who couldn't beat it on the numbers. So she came after who I have dinner with instead. That's not optics. That's just a smaller thing than she thought she'd have to be. Nobody clapped. It was better than clapping. The county rep asked Vanessa if she had documentation of an undisclosed benefit, and Vanessa didn't, because there wasn't one, and the review was denied, and the plan moved forward. And I sat there and did the single hardest thing the whole summer asked of me, which was to keep my mouth shut and let it be hers. Afterward, in the parking lot, Dominic Parker did a decent thing I didn't expect. He shook my hand and said the plan was good, and he'd told his aunt as much. And he left. And I understood he'd never really been the villain, just a man with a brochure who'd rather have been anywhere else. And I let him go without a word, because a man who resolves a thing by preserving the other guy's dignity gets to keep his own. Vanessa didn't shake anyone's hand. Some people the store softens and some people it doesn't. And she was the second kind. And I made my peace with the fact that she'd go on disliking us from a distance for years, and that the town would let her, and that not everything ties up. Meredith and I still don't get invited to the Ward's Christmas thing. I've decided I can live with it. The subplots close the way real ones do, in the days after, without ceremony. Mrs. Ruiz got her $400 a quarter credited back to the first wrong month, a check Meredith wrote by hand, and Mrs. Ruiz tried to refuse, and then didn't. And the flower stall got the corner slot in the new square, the one with the morning light, because I'd drawn it that way months before on purpose and never mentioned it to anyone, least of all her. Daphne cornered me at the coffee stand the week after the hearing and said, "You didn't take the exit." And I said, "You told me not to." And she said, "People never listen to me. It's very disorienting." And then she hugged me hard and fast and pretended she hadn't. Marcus Ward, the careful county engineer, put my corrected flood line into the permanent record with a little note that just said, "Reshot verified," which is the closest a man like that comes to a love letter. And every builder in that district has been quoting my 11 inches ever since. We didn't kiss at the hearing, I want to say that, because the movies would have. We drove home, all three of us, Elodie asleep against the window again, and Meredith reached over in the dark and put her hand on the console. Palm up, not asking, just offering. And I put mine in it. And we drove the dry streets I'd memorized months before and never mentioned. And that was the whole thing. That was plenty. The first ordinary morning after was the one that convinced me. No hearing, no rumor, no clock, just Meredith at the register doing the numbers by daylight for once, Elodie doing homework on the stool that used to be her grandfather's, and me restocking the cold case because I happened to be there and the case needed stocking. A customer came in, a new one, and asked Elodie who the guy was, meaning me. And Elodie said, without looking up from her worksheet, "That's Wes. He lives here now," which was not technically true yet and was completely true anyway. And Meredith didn't correct her. And I decided that a kid's math is better than a lease. I finished the cold case, Nobody thanked anybody. We just passed each other the coffee. 2 winters on. We run the market together. My name's on the co-op charter now, under hers, in that order, which is the right order, and the Riverside plan is a place people have mornings in, a public square with a bench where the light hits it, which I know because I drew it and then, for once, got to live in it. Elodie is 9 and bossy and calls me by my first name, except when she wants something, when I'm suddenly Wes, and I have never corrected her, because a nickname you didn't ask for is worth more than one you did. Last Saturday, there was a ribbon night for the finished square, the merchants and the county and half the town. And the new council chair, not Vanessa, the town has a way of quietly fixing things, asked Meredith to say a few words and asked, formally, who her partner in all this had been. And Meredith took the little scissors, and instead of naming the plan or the committee, she reached back and pulled me up beside her in front of the whole crowd in daylight, the exact daylight she'd once told me she couldn't be seen with me in. And she said, "This is Wesley Reed. He's mine. He built half of this and none of it would be here without him. And if anybody's still keeping score on the optics, I'd like it noted that I chose him. Out loud, on purpose." She didn't whisper it. She didn't have to. On the drive back, she had the old plan in the door pocket, the one from that first Tuesday. The corner over the market parcel gone soft and gray from a hand that kept finding it. And I realized the hand had never stopped finding it all this time, and that the worn place wasn't where. It was somebody deciding over and over that this was the page worth holding on to. I used to think the strongest position was the one you never had to raise your voice to defend. And I still do. I just learned it was never about being quiet. It was about being sure enough of a thing that you don't need it loud. And she was the first thing in my life I was ever that sure of. Self-worth isn't proven by winning the argument. It's the quiet certainty that lets you hand someone the microphone and trust them to be enough. Healthy love shows up, does the unglamorous work, and lets you be seen. That's what makes it steadier than the loud, breathless kind that only wants you at your easiest. So here's my question for you. When has someone chosen you out loud, on purpose, and what did it change? Tell me in the comments. And please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.